Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
Cindy's life was not easy, but she could not grumble at fate. But she was a master at networking, had a strong character and entrepreneurial spirit. All of this together helped Cindy to live worthily through the period of empty shelves, total scarcity, the turbulent 90s, and then playfully fit into the zero period of innovation, which frightened many people her age. Her husband Anthony, for example. Many wondered how such a strong-willed and at times even tough woman, a typical peddler, could marry a quiet and calm professor. But the fact remained. Cindy and Anthony married as students, gave birth to 2 offspring, and celebrated their golden wedding. 2 years after their 50th anniversary, Anthony left this world, and Mrs. Cindy was left to live out her years in a huge 2-story house at the entrance to the city. This house was the pride of the couple. Bought back in the hardships for nothing, in a dilapidated state, the house was lovingly brought to mind, and now resembled the estate of some wealthy merchant or boyar. Only in a modern way. On the first floor of the mansion was located a spacious kitchen, dining room, where they celebrated holidays, exquisitely furnished living room, pantry, bathroom, rest room with a TV and minibar, and a room where the servants stayed. Well, on the second floor there were 5 bright and spacious bedrooms. There was also a conservatory, and the hallway was lined with a variety of flower pots and planters. Cindy loved flowers, and the whole house was fragrant all year round. There was plenty to see in the backyard, too. For example, the gorgeous landscaping and a sea of flowers, not to mention a large bathhouse with sauna and swimming pool. And finally, the garden and vegetable garden. Cindy only shrugged her shoulders when her neighbors complained about the failure of cucumber and tomato crops, small, unsweetened berries or pea potatoes. No, this was not about her. The sea buckthorn in Cindy's garden was the size of grapes, and no local gardener could boast of strawberries as large as hers. "Cindy, tell me, how do you manage to grow such a crop?" Her neighbors tortured her. "You must have a secret, don't you?" "What secret is there?" The old woman waved it away. "Do not be lazy, that's the whole secret. Well, and do everything with love. Everything." The women knew that Cindy had no permanent servants. She used a cleaning agency twice a week and a catering company on holidays. Well, gardening was the holy of holies for this amazing woman. Since childhood she loved to dig in the ground, so she did all the gardening work herself, and with great pleasure. Neighbors only sighed enviously. With love for their gardens they clearly did not add up. But everyone has their weaknesses. Cindy's weakness was her children and grandchildren. More than once she asked herself, "Well, what did Anthony and I do wrong?" But she never found the answer. The couple had a daughter, Naomi, and a son, John. The eldest did not bother to study in school. Therefore, it is not surprising that when her mother stuttered about enrolling in the institute, only waved her hands. "Yes, who needs it? This higher education. I'll find a rich fiancé and I'll be like a cheese and butter." "And what do you think they're going to give you on a plate?" Cindy grinned. "On the occasion of graduation. But daughter, there's a lot of people out there who want a rich fiancé. There's less rich people. And they don't want just anyone. They want educated brides, cultured brides." But Naomi just waved her hand. "It's all clear," thought her mother. "That's how it is, the younger generation. They know everything better than we do. Come on." On the eve of her graduation, her daughter gave her parents a surprise. "Mom, Dad, I'm having a baby. So the institute is out of the question now," she said in an innocent voice, which made her parents mad. Anthony, who was always calm and intelligent, let out such a torrent of profanity that his wife hiccuped and then lost the power of speech. Until then, Cindy did not realize what a rich vocabulary of profanity owns her husband. Well, when the future grandmother came to her senses, she screamed so much that the dishes rattled, and only after letting off steam with a sigh she said, "We'll grow up. What now?" The young father, of course, by all rights and wrongs, denied paternity. After all, he, not unlike his friend, was going to enter the institute. To the surprise of parents, Naomi plunged headlong into the care of the baby. Julia was born healthy and got better day by day, a real doll. "My beauty," said the young mother proudly, my little princess." This lasted exactly until Naomi met a new love. Young people met in the supermarket, and according to the girl, it was love at first sight. When Barry, that was the name of Naomi's lover, settled in Cindy's house, the young mother seemed to have lost interest in her daughter. "Shame on you," Cindy shook her head. "You traded your baby for." "I'm sorry. God, I'm working, by the way. So if you have a baby, you should raise it. And your so-called husband can go to work. My father and I don't need a freeloader." And he tried to teach John how to smoke. Naomi's beau didn't like it. The boy thought that in this rich house, he would indulge in lovemaking at any time of the day or night, sleep until noon, and eat caviar with spoons. He, a technical school student, by the way, is on vacation. In the end, Barry promptly packed his bags and was off. Anthony and Cindy breathed a sigh of relief, while their daughter tearfully cried out that they had ruined her life. A couple months later, however, Naomi forgot all about Barrick because Sergei appeared on the horizon, and then Dima. Everyone wanted to hole up in the nicest house in town and live the good life. Eventually, Cindy made a bold statement. "Well, honey, I've had enough of your fiancés. We don't mind you making a life for yourself. It's a young man's thing. But why don't you just keep them out of the house? If a guy's serious, he's got to worry about where you're going to live." I'd say Naomi heeded her mother's words. The flow of new arrivals stopped, and when Julia was 15, her mother met the love of her life, got married, and moved to America with her husband. Naomi vowed to take her daughter back as soon as she and her husband were settled, but Julia had already graduated from school, celebrated her coming of age, and Naomi was in no hurry to fly after her. Why should she need a grown-up and very pretty daughter in her new life? After all, it's not far to sin, especially since Naomi and Robert had a little boy growing up. John, Cindy's youngest son, was an infantile boy. He was not interested in girls, and his parents even suspected the guy in a non-traditional orientation. But when John turned 20, he dispelled their doubts. "Mom, Dad, this is Veronica," solemnly announced the son. "She's expecting my baby." The parents sighed synchronously. They had heard something similar, but with a gender adjustment. By that time, Cindy's couple had already waved off their daughter's greedy suitors, and now they couldn't be fooled. Unlike his sister, John had not been able to avoid education. Sonny also did not want to gnaw the granite of science, but his parents, paying no attention to his protests, almost by the hand led him to the university. "You will be an economist," said his mother in a tone that excluded all objections. Well, Anthony smiled cordially. "But I hope that you, as befits a real man, have already taken care of where you will live and on what to support your future child. Besides, I'd like to meet the parents of the bride." "Oh, Dad. What's wrong?" "Well, Nika's got nowhere to go." "But she's lived somewhere before," Cindy pointed out. "She did," John nodded, "in a dormitory with drinking parents." "That makes sense," the parent concluded thoughtfully. "The girl can't wait to get out of her antisocial environment. She must have been looking for a sucker like our youngest. She's probably not even 18 yet." Cindy's guess was right. "Veronica, how old are you, if it's no secret?" she asked. 17, she said with her head down. "I see," said the potential mother-in-law, and went to prepare a room for the newlyweds. "All right," Cindy announced at dinner. "John, Veronica, you can stay here until you find a place to live." "But Naomi lives here with her little one," exclaimed her son, indignantly. "We've already talked about Naomi, but this is about you," Anthony intervened. "Besides, you're a man, and bringing your future, wife to your parents is a bit unseemly. And then I'm a single mom," Naomi said with a pout. She sounded as if she were at least a folk artist. "So what?" His brother grinned wryly. "None of your admirers have introduced you to their parents." "You know a lot about me." "Yes, I do." "Quiet," Cindy shouted. "All right, that's enough of this nonsense. I'll do as I say." The future daughter-in-law turned out to be an economical girl. She wasn't afraid of any kind of work, and the future in-laws liked that. No, the couple did not think of exploiting this, in general, quite a nice girl. But it so happened that cooking became Veronica's responsibility, which, it must be said, performed with pleasure. She cooked deliciously, while her own daughter was always afraid of spoiling her manicure, and Urquhart is not a good cook. In general, Veronica was not the worst option for a daughter-in-law. Better than her daughter's cavaliers who wanted freebies. 3 weeks later, John and Veronica were married. Cindy had already forgotten about her requirement to find a place to live. She had grown accustomed to, indeed, attached to, the young daughter-in-law. Perhaps the new mother-in-law wouldn't have thought of it if her son hadn't told her he found a nice apartment in a decent neighborhood. "Do you have any money?" Cindy raised her eyebrows in bewilderment. "I do," John answered cheerfully. "I got a part-time job." "What kind of a part-time job?" "I'm a part-time restaurant waiter." "Well, what can I say?" The mother smiled. "Good for you." The newlyweds moved out of Cindy's and into married life. Cindy and Anthony rejoiced. At least one child had made it. John and Veronica had a son, Max. The grandparents were over the moon. They already had a granddaughter and both wanted a grandson. However, the ideal ended there. One day, John came home with bruises, and a swollen left eye. "What's wrong?" Veronica gasped. "I fell." "You fell?" She squinted. "You look like you've been mauled by a threesome." "Why a threesome?" John flinched. "I'm just saying that, for example." Veronica looked at her husband and went to get some peroxide. Then she began her interrogation. "John, what happened?" demandingly asked the young woman, lubricating his wounds. "I said that I fell," raised his voice husband. "Well, I was not warned yesterday." "Why are you attached to me?" shouted he, did not his voice. "Well, and please." Veronica took offense and, throwing everything in the medicine cabinet, went to the kitchen. And then began calls from people to whom John allegedly owed a large sum of money. "If there is no money in 3 days, we turn on the meter," said Veronica, unknown interlocutor. "And another thing, you have a little one growing up, don't you?" She wanted to say something, but the caller had already disconnected. After hanging up the phone with trembling hands, Veronica sank powerlessly to the floor and cried. "What have you gotten yourself into?" She shouted. Veronica was mad with anger. "What are you playing at?" When John said he was moonlighting as a waiter in a restaurant, Veronica wanted to believe that he was. But in the back of her mind, a nasty worm of suspicion stirred. Not right away, of course. Once John brought home a large sum of money and said that wealthy customers gave such a generous tip. Then the sums got smaller, but that's just the way it is, isn't it? And when one day John didn't bring a Santa Rosa and came home beaten, Veronica wished she'd gotten her husband. And she's good. After all, almost every schoolchild knows that newcomers are first hooked on luck. Well, and then. But maybe it's not all so terrible. What kind of things are going on in this restaurant? Veronica desperately wanted her husband to dispel her suspicions, but alas. "Yes," John admitted. "What do we do now?" "You hothouse plant, do you realize they're not going to get off your back?" "But maybe somehow." "It can't," she said in despair. "What if they really do something to Max?" "Oh God, I'm a fool for getting involved with an idiot." John sighed heavily. Veronica was right. These people are really capable of anything. "I'll think of something," he promised. And he did. Knowing the code to his parents' safe, John sneaked into his father's office and pulled out several wads of money. After a little thought, he grabbed some of his mother's gold jewelry. "I'll get it all back when I'm in a good place," John urged his conscience. When his parents discovered it was missing, they called the police. Since there was no break-in, they checked everyone who knew the code. So the couple learned that their youngest son had become a gambler, and on top of that, a thief. John swore he'd quit, and for a while he did. But it is not without reason they say that gambling addiction is no different from alcohol or drug addiction. Veronica couldn't take it anymore and filed for divorce. Anthony and Cindy were very understanding. "Sorry about that, very sorry," said the now ex-mother-in-law. "But remember, the doors of our home are always open to you and Max." "You come to us too," Veronica smiled. "I will," Cindy replied, and the women embraced. After the divorce, John went on a bender. He was expelled from the university. In the end, his parents decided, let him live his life as he knows how. But you can't fool a parent's heart. Anthony and Cindy from time to time called their youngest son, and when asked how he was doing, John invariably replied, "It's fine." This went on for several years. One day the son stopped contacting them. John was put on the wanted list, but to no avail. "Yeah, someone must have screwed his head off," the sister suggested. "Card debts are a thing." "What kind of a man are you?" exclaimed the father with annoyance. What did I say? Naomi shrugged her shoulders. That's just it. Nothing, agreed her mother and sighed heavily. We all realize it's unlikely that John will be found alive. John was never found alive or dead, and 3 years later he was reported missing. His parents grieved, but life went on. They were cool about Naomi leaving, by the way. Well, the fact that she left Julia was for the best. Alas, their eldest daughter was the kind of woman who would run to the ends of the earth for a man, not caring about the child, if we call things by their proper names. And how would live a girl in a foreign country with a mother indifferent to her? Chirpacats maintained relations with the former daughter-in-law, who preferred not to tie themselves to the bonds of marriage. Grandchildren are our joy, Cindy said. She hoped with all her heart that Julia and Max would make them happy. The grandchildren would get a good profession and everything would work out, and at first it did. Julia entered the university, the Faculty of Philology. Max decided to become a programmer and entered the technical school. But over time, Anthony and Cindy began to realize that the grandchildren, like their parents, dream of a beautiful life, but do not want to make any efforts for this. When Julia dropped out of university, Grandma was heartbroken. But how could that be? Cindy said confusedly. That's the way it is, she cut her granddaughter off. Well, why should I bother for 5 years if my diploma is going to gather dust in a corner? But what makes you think it's going to be dusty? Because I'm not going to work. I have a lot of suitors. I just have to choose the most promising one and I'm golden. And the university is a waste of time and nerves. The old woman shook her head, but did not say anything. She sadly stated that Julia was like her mother. Genes? Thank God she'd been smart enough not to get pregnant at 17. Max also studied without much enthusiasm. Nowadays there are as many programmers as there are dogs, he once told his mother. What's the point of all this? That without a piece of paper, you're not even a piece of paper. But, poop, Veronica replied, believe me, or do you think I like working as a maid in hotels? Where every rich idiot wants to pinch your sirloin, she said. But her son just shrugged. That's just it, Veronica said with a sigh. I'm thinking of going somewhere else, at least by correspondence. You? Me, son, me. And at your age, it's God's good to study. But Max never heeded his mother's words, and a month later followed his cousin's example. The guys call me to the car service, he said. Are you sure? Veronica asked suspiciously, remembering his father. Mom, what are you doing? Perplexed asked Max. Well, do not believe me. I can send a photo report, or even take you on a tour. Come on, I believe, sighed his mother and grinned sadly. And for this you gave up a good monetary profession. No, I'll make money and open a business repairing computers and cell phones. Veronica sighed again. Well, at least that's that. When Julia turned 23, she realized that New Year's Eve was no longer one of her favorite holidays. That's what she told her best friend Tonya about, over a bottle of amazing Cypriot wine. Well, what's good about it? Julia hummed in response to Selena's amazed exclamation. You spend half a day at the stove and the rest of the day making things pretty. And all for what? That's right, to get drunk and stuff yourself. And that's after midnight. And who makes you get drunk and eat as if from tomorrow comes a hungry year? Chuckled her friend. By the way, the table, which is bursting of food, is no longer in trend. It is enough to prepare one single hot dish, 1 or 2 light salads, well, and something sweet. Yeah, Julia said mockingly. You tell that to our grandmother. And she knows that the salads will be in the refrigerator until the 2nd, if not the 3rd, and still have to be prepared for a company of hungry soldiers. Yes, Selena nodded. And even if we're going to celebrate New Year's Eve with a group of young people, we still have to stand at the stove. What's my point? Well, as far as I'm concerned, you don't have to stand at the stove this year, do you? She winked. I thought you said you and Mickey were going to spend New Year's Eve together. Julia sighed, and it didn't escape her friend's notice. Julia? What's up? Is there something I don't know? Did you two have a fight? No. Then what happened? It's not like anything happened, but... After dropping out of university, Julia chose her most promising fiancé. It turned out to be Mickey, an employee of a big construction firm, and not just any manager, but the head of sales. When Mickey offered the girl to move into his luxurious 4-room apartment, Julia hesitated a little for the sake of appearances, but of course agreed. Mickey is the kind of man I'd like to live with for the rest of my life, she told her grandmother. But is he serious? Cindy asked. Mickey loves me, she said simply. After all, he's the one who asked me to move in with him. The grandmother only shook her head, but said nothing. Offered to move in, she grinned to herself. That's an ironclad argument, isn't it? From time to time, Julia communicated with her mother by video link. She no longer resented Nami, for she was beginning to realize that she was no different from her, except for the fact that she hadn't had offspring yet, but that was a detail. When Julia told her mother that she had moved in with Mickey, she, unlike her grandmother, was happy for her daughter. In her own way, of course. Well done, Naomi said, my school. And winked at her daughter with a smile. Well, we'll take that as a mother's blessing, Julia thought cheerfully. Mickey didn't skimp on Julia's outfits, salons, gym and other gimmicks that made her even more beautiful and desirable. The young businessman realized that all this was for him and was ready to invest in the beauty of his beloved as much as necessary. The girl was crazy about the happiness that fell on her, but unfortunately, it had a downside. Mickey was serious about climbing the career ladder and worked like an ox, sparing no effort. When Julia moved in with him, that was a separate clause. Mind you, I can't always give you a lot of time, Mickey said. For example, next week's going to be tough, so no offense. Sometimes I'll come back late, sleep in my office, and of course I'll go on business trips. A lot. I mean, you realize this is all for us. Julia understood. I've discovered America, thought the girl. She did not understand the other. What was the point of this conversation? Julia was not a little girl, guessed that business is not a game of rappers, and money does not fall from the sky. She knew what she was getting into, but as it turned out, she didn't. The first week seemed like heaven to Julia. Mickey took her to expensive restaurants, clubs, and other interesting places. A couple of times Julia shone at social events, with pleasure noting the admiring male gazes and envious female. Julia was not the kind of girl to be surprised by lavish surroundings. In truth, her grandmother's house was much cooler. But Mickey had given Julia the lifestyle she dreamed of, the party, the opportunity to be seen, and most importantly, not to deny herself anything. So for that, she could turn a blind eye to a lot of things. So what if she couldn't always make the time? Julia would find something to do, like going shopping or a restaurant. And after all, meeting after a long separation promised to be passionate. But when the next week came that Mickey had mentioned, the girl thought differently. Just as she had warned, he did indeed come home late from time to time, and not always sober. I have to make contact with potential partners. He shrugged his shoulders in response to a questioning look from his roommate, and went to sleep in the study. Frankly speaking, Julia was a bit perturbed by this, but the girl immediately reassured herself. So well, and why are you dissatisfied? All this was agreed upon in advance, so there's no need to pout. A tense week turned into a month, then into another. To Julia's lamentations that they weren't spending enough time together, Mickey replied, "But I can't quit my job just to go to a restaurant with you." "No, of course not. But what? I'm a businessman in an executive position. What am I telling you?" All this was discussed from the beginning. The girl's lips quivered, and Mickey hurried to reassure her. "Why are we hanging our noses?" The businessman asked with a smile, kissing Julia on the nose, then on the lips. "I'd promise, as soon as I unload a little, we'll go somewhere to relax. Okay?" "Yeah," she whispered. Mickey kept his word. As soon as they had some free time, they went to a country club. They rented a small 2-story cottage with a picturesque terrace filled with flowers. Almost like grandma's, Julia thought. It was great, but unfortunately only for 3 days. Then Mickey's routine began again, and Julia was homesick. "Well, go shopping or go to the spa," said Mickey in response, when her beloved complained that she was bored. "I'm sick of your stores and salons," she wanted to shout, but she remained silent. Mickey's efforts were not in vain. He'd been noticed by the right people and given a raise. "I think with this salary I can afford to buy a house, or build one," Mickey said, sitting Julia on his lap. "You want a house, don't you?" "I do," she smiled. "I will," replied her lover. "Well, and then we can think about a child. How do you like this program?" Julia's heart beat joyfully. Mickey wants her to be the mother of his child. There's just one thing. Mickey's talked to Julia about anything but formalizing the relationship. Who is she in his life anyway? But that question remains unspoken. And then there's more. Mickey came home from work and said he'd been promoted. Promoted? But you're the boss, Julia said. Uh-huh, Mickey said condescendingly. Only I'm the head of sales, and they're offering me the job of general manager of one of the branches. Great, she nodded. Yeah, Mickey nodded back and began to give the details. The promotion meant a 2-city job, and Mickey would have to spend 3 or 4 months a year in another city. What about me? Julia asked, beginning to suspect that she might not like the answer. It was. Julia, but I'm going there to work. Besides, the management is giving me a 1-room apartment. So what? Are you saying we'll be cramped? Well, don't get it twisted, Mickey grimaced. Of course not, but you see, when I have a lot of work to do, I sit in my office all the time. Because I need to concentrate. In other words, I need complete silence and privacy. God, he's such a bore, Julia thought, but tried to turn it into a joke. I'll sit quietly, she smiled, like a mouse. Julia, don't do that. And Julia realized it was already decided. Mickey would do as he saw fit. And then you've got to admit, 3 or 4 months isn't that long. We can live apart, he continued, and with a smile he added, at least we won't be in each other's way. And in the age of messengers and video communication, that's no problem at all. And of course, no one will forbid us to go to each other on weekends. After some thought, she decided that Mickey was probably right. There was no difference between a late return with a sleepover in the office and such a long business trip. When Mickey left on his first business trip, I got sick, Julia told her friend. And you know, I got the impression that he didn't need me sick. He, of course, transferred money for medicine, wished me a speedy recovery and all that, but all this is somehow insincere or something. Usually so wish recovery to a lonely neighbor, which no one else to take care of. And we didn't talk much. Well, what did you expect? Selena shrugged. That's the lot of someone who isn't legally married. And for your Mickey, work always came first. Besides, you weren't terminally ill, you're not an invalid, and you're not the lonely neighbor. Mickey returned, and the lovers spent the rest of the summer and early fall together. They worked together on house options, discussed landscaping and furnishings, and finally Mickey said he'd take over early next year. What's wrong with that? Selena wondered. The man is trying. He's thinking about buying a house. Your Mickey is a thorough, consistent man. Maybe he wants to buy a house first, bring it up to scratch, and only then think about everything else. Why else would he tell you about a house, let alone a baby? Well, you know, men have 7 Fridays in a week, Julia grinned. And Mickey, for all his thoroughness, is no exception. Now, listen to this. In the first days of October, Mickey left again, and she felt so dreary that she felt like crying wolf. Sometimes Julia thought she wished Mickey hadn't come. They just Skype and text each other. The girl's soul was desperately longing for her beloved, and God heard her. All right, come over, Mickey said one day. It sounded like he was doing me a favor, but I didn't notice it then, Julia said bitterly. Mickey picked her up from the train station, brought her home and said, Baby, I'm going to have to leave now and you get some food ready. Well, and clean up, because with all this work I can't get my hands on it. And Julia imagined that Mickey was going to tell her how much he missed her and couldn't wait to be in bed with her. The words Julia had prepared to say stuck in her throat, but they didn't need to. Mickey hastily kissed her on the lips and left her. Well, that's it, you'll figure it out in a general way. Julia did as he asked and turned on the TV. There was some boring movie on and the girl took the remote. So many channels and nothing to watch, she thought unhappily. Julia dialed Mickey's number. Hello, she heard his impassive voice. Not the voice of a man who hadn't seen his beloved for a month. Mickey, are you coming soon? Julia asked and added playfully, I missed you. Julia, what kindergarten? Mickey said tiredly, and the girl imagined how he wrinkled his nose. I'll be late, as always. Well, you go for a walk. And I went for a walk around the neighborhood, Julia said sadly, pouring the rest of the wine. No, I didn't expect Mickey to give up his job for me. I'd gotten to know him, but he didn't notice me trying to seduce him tonight, did he? Even though I hadn't seen him in a month. You have to admit, it was a bit much. As time went on, Julia had the unfortunate but seemingly correct idea that Mickey didn't want to notice her attempts at intimacy. But to voice that thought out loud was to admit, no, I didn't even want to think about that. Yeah, Selena shook her head, and here I thought you were fine, that everything was fine. And that's just from the outside. We're not the first, we're not the last, Julia shrugged. Everyone in the business community is like that. Well, or almost everyone, but it's still a shame. She drank a bit half of her glass in one gulp, took a chocolate candy and said, "When I got home, I couldn't recover for a long time. Almost 2 months have passed, and still a residue on my soul." "Well, and you did not think that Mickey has someone?" voiced her friend what Julia was afraid to think. Why don't you say something?" "I did," she admitted. "It's a job, but he's changed a bit too much. What's to hide, though? Deep down, I really hope I'm wrong. Listen, Tonya, can I get another bottle?" "No, I've got a better idea. Get ready." "Where to?" "To the bar. We gotta do something to cheer you up. Let's pick a decent bar, sit down and have a drink." Julia thought it was a good idea and went to change. In the bar, 2 young men approached the friends, decent and sober. "Can I join you?" a handsome tall brunette asked, keeping his eyes on Julia. She wanted to say no, but Selena beat her to it. "Why not?" The brunette, whose name was Harry, continued to glare at Julia. The other gentleman's name was Billy, and he was looking at Selena with interest. "Don't you think Harry's undressing you with his gaze?" Selena winked as the girls went into the ladies' room. "I don't," Julia asked with a grin. "I'm sure you do. So what's the problem? By the way, you can't beat a wedge with a wedge." Either she was too upset with Mickey or the alcohol had done its job, but Julia thought, why not? What happened next was a blur. A second bottle of cognac, Harry's arm around her waist, then he kissed her neck. Then a cab, a one-room bachelor apartment, and, as a consequence, a morning in someone else's bed. "Good morning," Harry smiled, obviously sensing she was awake. Julia sat up, rubbed her temples and replied, "Good, is it good?" "Well, I don't know about you, but it's good enough for me. Warmth, snow outside the window, a beautiful girl next to me. It's great, I envy myself." "Actually, I'm not like that. I actually have a fiancé," Julia rambled, but Harry only grinned. "But I guess it's not all smooth sailing, seeing as how you met him in a bar." "No, The new acquaintance waved his hand. "Come on, why complicate everything?" he said calmly. "I don't care about such and such, you know. Anyway, any relationship leads to sex. So why this unnecessary femininity?" The girl smiled and hung a graceful shoulder, saying, "I don't know." "I never did either," Harry summarized. "But we've learned that we're pretty good for each other, huh? So we can hang out from time to time. If you're okay with a relationship without commitment, of course." Harry winked at Julia, and they reached for each other. Harry turned out to be an interesting, generous, and honest man. Over a late lunch, he told Julia that he was divorced, had an 8-year-old son, and had a buddy relationship with his ex-wife. "Well, why would I do that?" wondered Julia. "He said himself that we can only have a relationship without commitment. So why do I need his son?" "Deniska always comes first for me," Harry said. "And if I suddenly had to choose who to spend the weekend with, my choice would be my son." Well, fair enough, at least, Julia thought, and grinned unfunny to herself. Another one who likes to negotiate ashore. Apparently, it's a trend with businessmen. "Openness for openness," smiled the new beau. "What are you breathing?" "There's not much to tell about me," she shrugged, but complied with the request. She didn't want to go to an empty apartment, and the girl answered affirmatively to her new lover's proposal. The next morning was Monday. Harry drove to work, generously allowing Julia to sleep in. "Slam the door and you're done," he said. Waking up at 10 in the morning, Julia began to get ready. She took her smartphone from the nightstand and saw a notification of a transfer of a considerable sum of money. At first, Julia thought it was a transfer from Mickey, but when she saw the note, "It's for cab fare and to buy yourself something," she grinned. "I guess he's decided he's bought me off my ass," she stated. "Why? That's an option too, especially since things are so vague with Mickey." In the meantime, Mickey had stopped calling, explaining that he was busy and couldn't talk to her properly. It's getting worse by the hour, Julia thought. Harry didn't show up for 3 days. When he called, he asked her what she was doing for New Year's Eve. "Well, I can't say anything yet," she said thoughtfully. What Julia hadn't thought about yet was where and with whom she would celebrate New Year's Eve. Actually, everything depended on Mickey, and he hadn't said anything definite either, and it would be nice to visit her grandmother. Because of the drama in her personal life, Her relationship with Cindy was limited to occasional phone calls. However, we'll probably visit Grandma first. What if Mickey comes and they visit the old lady together? Jen, let me call you back later, okay? Whatever you say, Princess. Mickey condescended to answer and said that he hoped to finish the current project by the end of the month. But what? Julia asked doomily. But I probably won't be able to get away until New Year's vacation, he replied. Why did I come to you? Julia thought. I don't think that's a good idea. I work until the evening, including the 31st. I'm so tired I can't feel my legs. So, baby, I'm gonna celebrate in my sleep. I see, she said, hiding her resentment. You're not the only one. Selena went to a ski resort with a new admirer, so I hope you're not offended. No, really? So we'll celebrate in our sleep. Yeah, okay, well, if that's all you have to ask, let's say goodbye. I really do have a lot of work to do. Does he even realize that this call was my last attempt to save our relationship? Julia thought angrily. Well, he asked for it. So she called Harry. He was free this New Year's Eve. It was as if he'd been waiting for her. Grandma, Happy New Year, Happy New Year, Happy New Year. Julia chirped 3 hours before the chime struck. What new happiness do I have? Cindy grinned. If only you'd come, because you've neglected the old lady, and Max hasn't been around lately. I don't feel good about him. Is something wrong? No, but Veronica said the guy's into some shady business, so I'm worried he might follow in his father's footsteps. Julia knew her Uncle John was a gambler. Then her uncle had been reported missing and was probably no longer alive. She hadn't noticed anything like that about Max, however. It had been months since they'd seen each other. You'll be celebrating with yours, won't you? Grandma asked. Yes, Julia answered, thinking she hadn't lied so much. I thought I'd come to your house first. Well, I'll be waiting. Happy New Year again. After a 10-minute conversation with her mother and little brother Ernest, Julia looked at her watch and, with a gasp, began to dress up. She realized that she wanted to meet Harry in full force. She realized she wanted to go with him to her grandmother's in the late morning. After chatting with her family, Julia went on cutting up her salads and deli meats. Harry arrived at 11:30 with 2 huge packages. What's this? Asked Julia, nodding at the bags. Food, Harry replied with a smile. I bet your refrigerator is hardly full. Well, why not? She objected. Because women like you, living without a man, are usually satisfied with vegetables, fruit, and yogurt. It's good for the figure. Oh, you're an expert on women, aren't you? Harry said modestly, and Julia had an interesting question. How am I going to get him out when Mickey arrives? I can't get through a week's worth of food on my own. But like Scarlett O'Hara said, I'll think about it tomorrow. In the meantime, can I help you? The gentleman asked, nodding at a plate of vegetables sprinkled with herbs. Well, if it's not too much trouble, Julia smiled. When the table was ready, Harry said, and I have a surprise. Very interesting, smiled Julia, who wasn't much for surprises. And then there were those thoughts of Mickey. Harry went into the hallway and returned with a silver bag. And just where did he manage to hide it? Wondered the girl. The package contained Santa and snow maiden costumes, but with sexual overtones. In any case, the lady's attire is purely symbolic. A short fur coat, stockings, provocative underwear. The sexy bow was completed by a cap with a fluffy fur trim. What is it? Julia asked playfully, realizing that it was a role-playing outfit. Put it on, Harry said softly, realizing in turn that the game had already begun. And she did. The guest also put on the Santa Claus costume. Wow, exclaimed the guest. Julia, you can't do that. How? She asked innocently. Well, you can't be so seductive, Harry said, looking at his watch. There were just over 20 minutes left until New Year's Eve, and Harry decided not to waste them. But then the doorbell rang and Julia rushed into the hallway. Well, no, I'll open it myself, said the lover. I'm not an idiot to let you out like this. But she never told Harry that the apartment was Mickey's. It wasn't that Julia wanted to pass it off as hers, with all that entails. It was just that the conversation never came up, and Harry probably assumed that she and Mickey were renting the apartment, or, more likely, hadn't thought about it. Take it easy, said Julia mentally to herself. I'm not expecting anyone. Maybe someone got the wrong apartment. I mean, What's the big deal? Happy New Year, she heard Harry's voice. Can I help you? Julia couldn't make out what he said, but the silence seemed strange, perhaps even suspicious. Julia couldn't stand it any longer and walked out. What's going on here? The words froze in her throat. Mickey stood on the doorstep dressed as Santa Claus. He had a suitcase in one hand and a bottle of champagne in the other. Mickey, I see you're not bored, he said. No, not at all, said Harry cheerfully. Young man, it's not what you think it is. It sounded silly and like a bad joke, but what else can I say? That's what I figured, Mickey grinned. You must be a lost Santa Claus. Yeah, Harry smiled. Well, I'm off. I'm expected in very good company. The guests promptly packed up and left. Well, and the host, not paying attention to the fact that Mr. President began his congratulatory speech, began to clarify relations. And you are good, he said slowly. You've started a reserve airfield. I don't. It's not like that, I can explain. And I'll give you that opportunity, Mickey assured him. In the meantime, I'll do the talking. I just can't get my head around it. I've been working my ass off just to get this whole thing over with. I wanted to, surprise you. And you've been here while I've been away, doing whatever the hell you want. You like role-playing? There's a lot I didn't know about you. I didn't try to, Julia said. When was I supposed to try? Wasn't it when I was literally falling asleep at work? My eyes were drooping, and I was working on my laptop and papers. I thought, here, a little more, and Julia and I will buy a house. I'll propose to her, and, what to say now? The girl listened to Mickey and realized this was the end. Her dreams of a beautiful life and the lifestyle she'd been striving for had been shattered. Mickey wouldn't forgive, and he was right. He'd worked hard for their future family, and Julia hadn't given a damn. Well, what prevented me from telling him of my suspicions? She lamented, and that I was afraid to hear the confirmation of treason. Fool! How is that an excuse? Normal people in such situations explain themselves and not jump into bed to the first person you meet. Anthony Vladimirovich had long ago congratulated citizens on New Year's Eve. The chime struck 12, and these two people were having an argument. Actually, it couldn't even be called a relationship. Mickey was talking. Julia was listening in silence because she had nothing to say. And then she said, I'm sorry. And she went to pack her things. Julia didn't realize how much time had passed before Mickey appeared in the bedroom doorway. Where are you going now? He asked. Anywhere. Don't be silly. I'm not an animal. Well, where are you going with that suitcase now? Stay till morning. All right, Julia shrugged. You can lie down here. I'm going to the study. The girl nodded, and then she realized that she was still in her snowmaiden costume. Julia hated to tear off the frivolous outfit that had ruined her dreams, changed into the first homemade dress she could find and went to watch TV. There was soft music coming from Mickey's office. He was probably watching some New Year's Eve program too. At 7 in the morning, Julia got dressed and left the apartment that had been her home for months. Where will I go now? She thought bitterly. Of course, Julia could stay with her grandmother. Cindy would gladly take her granddaughter in. After her grandfather's funeral, she'd be lonely in such a big house. But she couldn't go to her grandmother's house because Julia had told her how great things were with Mickey. And now what? Come back with her tail between her legs and admit defeat? Oh no. The girl reached the neighboring yard, sat down on a bench. And where to go now? She thought dejectedly. And it seems to come up with an idea. Julia went to the train station, handed over her suitcase in the luggage room and went to the cab stand. How much would it cost to get into the city? She asked the elderly Mitsubishi driver. $20, the man estimated. Let's go. Cindy was delighted with her granddaughter. Look how fashionable she's become, the old woman said admiringly, eyeing her chinchilla coat and expensive suede boots. Well, come in. After a heart-to-heart with her grandmother, Julia went to Harry. The girl wrote him a message in the cab, and he seemed happy about this turn of events. Harry almost immediately wrote, Come, I'll be waiting. He completed his message with smiley faces, hearts, and flowers. Well, that was encouraging. But why did Julia have the feeling that she was being taken advantage of? She remembered Scarlett O'Hara's catchphrase again and thought, to hell with prejudice. Why not if the relationship brings pleasure to both of us? How beautiful you are. Harry exclaimed as he greeted her. "And isn't it a shame for your what's-his-name, Mickey, to lose such beauty?" "Let's not talk about him," smiled Julia gently. "My princess's word is law to me." Julia stayed with Harry for a month. Living with him was not much different from being with Mickey, except that Harry had occasional contact with his son. And not just socializing, but going fishing with him, going to the recreation park, taking him to cafes. At such times, Julia was left to herself, but she even liked it. In one way or another, she got a lot more attention from Harry than from Mickey. Julia had a trip to the gym planned for that evening. In the meantime, she would fry Harry his favorite pork chops. Julia took out of the refrigerator already cut up pieces of pork, which only needed to be defrosted, battered, and salted and peppered. The girl put the meat in the microwave and turned on the defrosting mode. The doorbell rang. Who could it be? Thought Julia, and went to open the door. On the doorstep stood a tall, stately lady in her 30s with perfectly straight and smooth ash-colored hair. A black fur coat set off her hair and bright blue eyes beautifully. The makeup in cold colors blended well with the image. "Hello," smiled Julia. "And you, I see, as if you recognized me," said the beauty, ignoring the greeting. Julia did not see the point of breaking the comedy, so she admitted, "Yes, I did. You're Ariana, Harry's ex-wife." "There are no ex-wives," Harry's ex-wife grinned, "especially among those who have children by those husbands. Why don't you let me in? Especially since you're going to have to vacate the premises anyway." "What? Harry didn't warn you about anything?" Ariana wondered, and Julia realized she wasn't lying or even joking. What should he have warned me about? That Deniska and I were moving here for a couple months. My son's in school now and I'm here. If you don't believe me, call Harry. Julia did, but why didn't Harry tell her? "Yes, honey, it's true," he repented. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I thought it would just sort itself out or something." "I wonder how?" Julia asked with a chuckle. "Hutch, don't," Harry said tiredly. "It doesn't suit you." "But it looks great on you," she said, and then she shut down. "Are you sure?" Ariana said triumphantly. "I didn't doubt it," Julia said, trying to sound calm. "I didn't want to give that Serena the pleasure of humiliation." "Well, that's fine." Julia packed her things while Harry's ex-wife watched her. "Are you going to stay here?" the girl asked. "Imagine, yes." Ariana replied arrogantly. "God forbid anything should go missing. There are many of you, and only one wife." Julia preferred not to say anything. "I put the chops in there to defrost," she said goodbye. "Put them in the fridge or fry them. I'll figure out without you what to do in the house of the father of my child." Once again, the problem of where to go. Julia walked across the courtyard. Her smartphone beeped. A translation from Harry. What a ride of unheard of generosity, thought the girl ironically, and when she saw the message, she laughed hysterically. "You'll get yourself an apartment. For a month is enough, and further, I'm sure, you will not disappear," wrote Harry, clearly hinting that Julia will find another beau, ready to settle her at his place. "Why, isn't that so?" she thought self-critically. "You motherfuckers got your hands full." Julia was thirsty, so she walked into the supermarket. Having bought a half-liter bottle of mineral water, the girl went to the cash register and suddenly heard shouting. "I'm so sick of these thieves. We lose our bonuses because of them. We have to work. Call the police. Why bother with him?" Two guards were leading another shoplifter to the exit, a young man Julia recognized as her cousin. "Wait!" she shouted and ran after the guards. "Wait!" The boys turned around, and Julia said, "Let him go." "Oh, another defender," explained one of the guards, a tall blond man with a beard. "Now we will let him go, and tomorrow he will steal not a loaf of bread and the can of stew, but come nap for 1,000, added the second, a short, dark-haired, stout man. "Bread and stew?" Julia marveled. "So let me pay." "Twice as much." The first guard made a condition. "No problem." "You don't have to pay for me," Max muttered. "Don't you have any money to spare?" "Shut up," shouted the stocky brunette. "A girl like that wants to pay for you, and you're making a fuss." "And who is she to pay for me?" "Max?" Julia exclaimed in surprise. "Don't you recognize me?" "Should I?" said the boy, and looking at her more closely, aghast. "Julia, are you?" "I am," she smiled. "Ex-husband?" the dark-haired man asked, listening to the conversation with interest. "No," Julia disappointed him. "He's my cousin." So, that's it, the blonde summarized. We don't care if he's a brother or a matchmaker. Pay the goods in double and you're free to go. And turned to Max. And if you get caught again, you won't get off so easy. You'll go to the police in a heartbeat. You look great, sister, Max complimented. I guess life spoils you, huh? It has, Julia sighed. Now it seems to be in the past. I thought you lived with some rich guy. Love gone. You could say that, she nodded. Cheated? My brother suggested it. Max, let's not talk about that, Julia said. Maybe I'll tell you sometime. Well, let's not. So let's not. Where do you live now? Nowhere yet, she sighed, remembering the essentials. We just broke up today. I don't want to go to my grandmother. They'll start asking questions. Let's go then. Where to? You'll see. Is it far? No, it's a 5-minute walk. It's just this. What? Do you have money? Why? Julia was worried. Don't worry, I'm not offering anything terrible. I just need to buy some groceries. So you went grocery shopping? She couldn't help smiling. Uh-huh. Why don't you live with your mother if things are so sad? I don't need her, Max said with annoyance. I'm fed up with her moralizing. Besides, when I left technical school, I was going to go into business and failed. So my mom gave me the whole tire. She said I shouldn't have dropped out of school and stuff. So I left. They're better off without me. Who's that to them? Don't you know anything? Our Veronica got married. Wow, Aunt Veronica got married. I'm so out of touch with life. Julia exclaimed in surprise and thought, and he and I are in the same boat. The situation is almost the same. The brother and sister did not go to the supermarket where Max had been so shamefully caught. The other store was across the street, and as they stood near the crosswalk waiting for the green light, Julia asked, So I don't get it, where do you live? It's not far, behind that supermarket. But Julia, here's the thing. Julia had a feeling from the start that her cousin wasn't telling her the truth. As far as she knew, Aunt Veronica was the kindest of women. It didn't seem to her that she could have gotten to anyone. It was more like her son had gotten to Veronica with his antics. Either way, something's not right. Shoplifting at the supermarket, some random apartment. There's definitely no rent money if Max is a supermarket thief. And then there's this business. Anyway, I'm not living alone. With a girl? I hope I'm not embarrassing you. And with a girl too, Max answered with a mysterious look, and the sister began to think about how to get rid of her brother. Maybe it's not worth it with this apartment. God forbid, I'll get into some story. After all, I have money. And in a month. But the light turned green, and Julia followed Max, undecided. They bought 5 cans of stew, the taste of which Julia had long forgotten, if she ever remembered, 3 packages of pasta, a couple of kilos of potatoes, an impressive forkful of cabbage, vegetable oil, some vegetables and herbs. I think we're out of tea, Max remembered, and put 2 packs of cheap black tea bags in the basket. Personally, I prefer coffee, Julia said. So any win for your money, divorced his brother. Phew. Well, what else? How about this, a bottle? On the occasion of the meeting, eh? Are you sure that the bottle is enough? Grinned the girl. How many boys and girls are there? 3 boys and 2 girls. Oh yeah. To hell with you, we'll take 2. I think I'll have a drink too. What do I mean? Max was happy. The apartment where Max and his boys and girls lived was located on the first floor of a brick 5-story building. The door was upholstered in red shabby dermatine. Max pressed the old-fashioned bell, and in a second he was opened by a black-haired girl who looked like a gypsy. Max, what took you so long? She asked in a heavy southern accent. It's like the girl was standing under the door, Julia thought. I ran into someone, me Julia. The girl gave her an unkind look, but when Max clarified that Julia was his cousin, her eyes warmed noticeably. That's his girlfriend, Julia guessed. The entire Gauck company was something of a congregation. Besides Max and his girlfriend Jessica, a Moldovan citizen, there was another couple living in the apartment. When Julia and Jessica went to get the 3rd bottle, her brother's friend told them that Ivan and Lucy had moved in because of the girl's parents. Her parents didn't want their daughter to get involved with Vanka, Toman explained. Why? Because his parents are alcoholics. And finally Voldemar, who was sort of their leader. He had a hard look in his eyes and the same hard, tarry hair. When Julia saw Voldemort, she knew she was in love. On the third day of her stay at the Blathada, as Julia called her new home, she and Voldemort were alone together. Without saying a word, he kissed Julia roughly and picked her up. "How did you meet my brother?" Julia asked, nestled on her new lover's shoulder. "Your brother owed a serious man a very large sum of money, and I bought his debt," Voldemort replied with a shrug. "Now he works for me." "Working? What does he do?" "Less you know, you sleep better," he cut off, and Julia realized that she could not wait for a detailed answer. When Max Sherbakov met a cousin, he could not believe in such luck, and it's not a matter of kinder feelings. Two no-nonsense problems on him piled up, so that, not up to sentiment. The plan was immediate, and Julia was a key part of it. He had to borrow money for his business. It was Harvey, known in certain circles as Long. He assured Max that it was the right thing to do, but everything ended up with the fact that the failed businessman was left without money and even got into a huge debt. Max suspected that all the money had settled in Long's pockets, but where was the proof? Besides, it doesn't change anything for him. There was a debt, and it had to be paid. But since there was nothing to pay, you have to work it off. "I'm sick of it, I'm so sick of it all," thought Max, returning from another case. He wanted to get out of debt, to take Jessica away from there, to live a quiet life and not to depend on all sorts of crowbars and Voldemorts. When his sister said she didn't want to go back to her grandmother's house, Max huffed. "We'll have to punny," he thought. If Max had initiated his plan to anyone who knew Cindy, that someone would have twiddled his thumb. "Are you out of your mind?" they'd say. Cindy, despite her advanced age, can't be taken with her bare hands, and Julia wouldn't go for that. At first, Max wanted to involve his little sister as an accomplice, but quickly abandoned the idea. Julia wouldn't go for it. However, Max had thought of every little detail. He and Julia would visit Cindy. Well, during the tea party, the loving granddaughter will add Cloflin to the old lady's tea. Next, she and Julia will take the grandmother to some dump where the homeless hang out, then take over her house, because it shouldn't be empty. It's winter, and if the furnace isn't fired up, the neighbors will sound the alarm, and she and Julia can tell them grandma's in the hospital. There were a lot of valuable things in the house, acquired by the enterprising old woman during the reign of Tsar Peas, as Max understood it, and if they sold them all, they could not only cover the debt, but also live for a month or two. "Will it not be long before I am free of all this?" he thought. In principle, he could do it all himself, but there is one but. Julia knows where the valuables are, which means he can't do it without her. Besides, Cindy loved and trusted her granddaughter. Julia smiled. Despite his rough exterior, with her Voldemort became tame and affectionate, like a house cat. "Do you drive?" he asked. "I just want to have a drink. If you don't mind, of course." "Why should I mind?" Julia asked in surprise. "I'm not your wife." "Well, everything can be," smiled Voldemort. "So how are we with driving?" "Well, I have a license, but I haven't driven a car for a long time. In fact, I've only driven a few times." Talking about driving reminded her of Mickey. After all, he paid for Julia's driving lessons. After she got her license, she drove Mickey's Peugeot, but frankly without much enthusiasm. Julia in principle did not want to join the ranks of auto ladies, but Mickey said. A modern girl should be able to drive a car. And then they broke up. Well, being able to drive had proved useful. Except Julia's not a very experienced driver, and it's icy outside, by the way. "So what?" Voldemort grinned. "I'll be right behind you." "What kind of car?" "Automatic, I hope." "I'm just not good with manuals." "Mazda, so I think you can handle it." "Well, okay." Voldemort's Mazda was pretty new. Year before last at the latest, Julia determined. Voldemort's summer house turned out to be small but cute and very cozy. They had a wonderful time, and in the morning drove to the apartment. To be honest, Julia was afraid to drive. The road was a mess, and she hadn't really woken up yet. "Don't be afraid of anything," Voldemort said encouragingly. After about 10 minutes, Julia felt much more confident. "There, good girl," said the owner of the car when they got on the highway, and Julia finally relaxed. Other women drive and don't shake like rabbits. What happened next was like a bad dream. When she saw a man on the hood, she thought she was hallucinating. The victim's face was twisted with horror. Oh, her heart felt it. Julia braked sharply and screamed in terror. Shit, 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 shit. When did he get out? The road was completely empty. Well, you saw it. Saw, frighteningly calmly answered Voldemar. Why did you stop? Let's keep going. But after all, he needs help. Maybe. Are you stupid? He yelled. What the hell kind of help? It's against the law to transfer a vehicle to another person. Or didn't you know that? Of course Julia knew that. But it's not human, she muttered, and then she added more confidently. And for that matter, I didn't insist on driving. You were the one who wanted a drink. There, Voldemar splashed his hands. I'm still to blame. How was I to know that you were so blind? Well, what are we standing here for? Let's go, or the people will come, and then we won't be able to turn away. You don't think there's someone who can memorize my number? Julia sighed heavily and stepped on the gas. When they reached the house, Voldemar noticed a dent in the hood, and the windshield was cracked. It wasn't sad. He stretched out and clucked his tongue unhappily. Not only can the car be covered where you don't want it, but the damage. It's not fatal, but it costs money. I have some money, Julia hastened to assure him. Money is good, Voldemar said thoughtfully, but we'll need it for the household. Well, what are we waiting for? Let's go to the apartment and we'll talk there. When they entered the apartment, Jessica was peeling potatoes. In the frying pan, giving off an appetizing odor, meat was frying. Where are the others? The boss asked, noticing the absence of the occupants of the apartment. Working, the girl replied. Good, very good, said Voldemar and turned to Julia. Well, you see how everything is going well. No one will interfere with us. Almost no one. That's right, said the leader. That you're willing to compensate for the crack in the glass and the dent in the hood is certainly commendable. There was no hint of tenderness in Voldemar's voice, and yet this morning he had spoken differently to Julia. The girl realized wistfully that Voldemar had never loved her. You're thinking of the wrong thing, Julia warned herself. Perhaps it was your fault that a man died, and he's going to say something very unpleasant, maybe even terrible. Yes, I'll make it up to him, she nodded. That's fine, but you do realize that this everything also includes the person you hit with my car. And that's the risk of someone finding out about it and reporting it. And that risk costs money. A lot of money, Voldemar said admonishingly, and the girl realized with horror where he was going. She, like Max, would have to repay the debt. I'm not interested in money, the boss confirmed Julia's worst fears, but that was just the beginning. Max said your grandmother lives in a mansion that has a lot to offer. All you have to do is tell us where and what she has. We slip something in the old lady's tea to temporarily incapacitate her, then we take whatever we like. Then we take her somewhere far away from here. How's that for a plan? By the way, I'm letting you in on all the details. Everything's transparent. Everything's fair game. No, the girl shook her head in horror. Anything but Grandma. As you wish, shrugged Voldemar, smiling nastily. Then everyone will know that you hit a man. You know, they won't give you a medal for such a thing. But this way, imagine, you'll save yourself from jail, and you'll close your debt, and you'll help your brother. One little thing, and you and Max are free as the wind. That sounds like a great deal to me. It was Max's idea, Julia grimaced. What a monster he is. They've been waiting for the right moment. What's the use of talking about it now? God, what have I gotten myself into? Fool, stupid. Anyway, think, summed up the boss and got up from the chair, letting her know that the conversation was over. Voldemar. Yes, my love, he asked curtly. But I'll do whatever you say. Well, that's good. I knew you were a clever girl from the start. Just don't try any magic tricks. That's not gonna work on me. And don't go to the cops. It's a dead end. I've got it all covered. The grandmother received her grandchildren so warmly that Julia's heart ached. She felt like an asshole. When her granddaughter called, Cindy put the dough on. And while it was rising, she made all sorts of goodies. Her grandmother had set the table in the living room, which only made it easier. I'm sure she'd be running to the kitchen. Max gabbled and ate for 3. Julia, on the contrary, was silent and she couldn't eat. The girl wanted to howl with longing and hopelessness. She also wanted to protect her grandmother from all adversity, but Julia's position was too precarious for that. Julia, you look a little bloody, said her grandmother anxiously. Are you sick? No, she smiled strangely. I'm fine. I don't think so, Cindy shook her head. Heart trouble again, I guess. Yeah, she nodded languidly. I see, nodded her grandmother and turned up her nose. I think the pie's coming. I'll be right there. Cindy went out, and her grandson wasted no time in dropping a drop of clotholine into her tea. Julia looked away defiantly. Couldn't you be a little more lively? Max rebuked her. No. She cut him off and wondered if she'd accidentally dropped her grandmother's cup. Don't even think about it, her brother warned her with a smile. Max praised the pie, and Julia prayed to God that her grandmother wouldn't drink the tea. But alas, Cindy smiled guiltily and immediately dropped her head to her chest. The client is ripe, Max said. Cindy's story shocked the homeless. She did not remember how she ended up at the city dump, where the old woman was found by Mityai, one of the bums, and thus prevented her death from hypothermia. But no matter how you look at it, and from everything it appeared that it was the work of her grandchildren. What a bunch of bastards. Maria, a homeless woman in her 50s, explained. John shook his head. His son and niece could do such a thing. It's incomprehensible. He's no angel, but what kind of man would take his grandmother to the dump? Cindy didn't want to believe it, but facts are stubborn things. It was especially frustrating to realize that Julia was involved. After all, her grandmother had practically raised her, welcomed her, loved her more than life, and she had repaid her with what? Hush, dear, don't get so hot. Cindy besought herself and suddenly remembered the sad, tense face of her granddaughter. And the older woman also remembered Veronica's words that Max was engaged in some dubious business. And that means the girl was just used. Cindy aghast and laid out her conclusions, ending them with the words, besides, lately Max hasn't looked me in the face. I guess it's a good thing he's on fire. The homeless looked at her with respect, and John felt incredibly proud of his mother. Cindy had always been a smart woman. It was just a shame he hadn't listened to what she had to say. It's not too late, John thought. Mom's still alive, which means I still have a chance to make it up to her. It's easy to find out, he said importantly. And then I could get my revenge. How do you feel about that? Wonderful, Cindy smiled, and John recognized her as the young, blooming, energetic woman who had scolded him for his failing grades. When she told him that his father was gone, John suddenly realized how fleeting life was. Their meeting with his mother was a miracle, for God had given him the opportunity to make amends with his mother. Wow, this is quite a place. Jessica, usually reserved, explained. Make yourself comfortable, Max said cheerfully. We'll have a good time. Aren't you afraid the landlady will show up? No, he shook his head with a smile. She's probably already gone to the next world. Isn't it a pity? My beloved asked thoughtfully. After all, my own grandmother. Do you know where? He smirked. I see that you know, so do not think about anything and feel at home. Meanwhile, Julia was taking a soothing peppermint bath and frantically thinking of ways to help her grandmother. If it wasn't too late, of course. At the thought of it, it became quite uncomfortable. But maybe it's not all that bad, she thought to herself, and then she snickered. Well, yes, it's not, but a man being run over. The water in the tub had already cooled, but Julia didn't seem to feel it. The girl tensely thought, what the hell? She raged angrily to herself. Grandmother's life is in danger, and I'm shaking for my own skin. I'm sure it's not all hopeless. I'd better find a good lawyer. Julia stood up abruptly and, rubbing herself furiously with a large fluffy towel, thought, let it be what it will be. That same day, the girl made an appointment with a lawyer. Fortunately, he could see her the next morning. Julia looked critically at her closet and shook her head. Most of her clothes had been left at Mickey's, and she hadn't had the time to pick them up, especially in light of recent events. There were frivolous sweaters, jeans, and a beautiful, stylish but frivolous dress that was not appropriate for a lawyer's office. Julia looked at the closet critically and shook her head. Most of it had been left at Mickey's, and she hadn't had the time to pick it up, especially in light of recent events. The closet was filled with frivolous sweaters, jeans, and a beautiful, stylish but frivolous dress that was completely inappropriate for a lawyer's office. Having thoroughly reviewed her things, Julia found that not everything was so hopeless. She found a short knit jacket with a houndstooth pattern and large, glossy black buttons. It was accompanied by a pair of slim pants of the same material. Trying on the outfit, Julia was satisfied. Both fit perfectly. You can report this Voldemort, of course, but where's the proof that he was blackmailing you? As far as I can see, none of the possible witnesses will sign up for it, the lawyer said. Is there nothing that can be done? Julia asked in despair. No matter how you look at it, you can't do without the police. For a start, it would be nice to find out what happened to the pedestrian who was hit. Maybe someone helped him? It would be good if so, thought the girl and said, well, thanks for that. The glass doors of the business center opened obligingly, but Julia had no time to take a step before she was called. She turned around, almost breaking her heel, and saw Mickey. Hi, she said, embarrassed. Hi, the ex smiled. Where'd you disappear to? No reason. I missed you. Julia was silent, not knowing what to say. Look, Julia, why are we standing here? Let's get in the car. Can I give you a ride? Suddenly, the girl burst into tears and buried herself in Mickey's chest. Julia, what are you doing? I'm glad to see you too. But, he asked confusedly. Julia only shook her head, continuing to shed tears on Mickey's expensive jacket. He gently pulled the girl away from him and, putting his arm around her waist, led her to the parking lot. Did you change the car? Julia sniffled, looking at the white Infiniti. I did, nodded Mickey, opening the car. Please. There's something wrong? He asked, pulling out of the parking lot. Yeah, Julia sighed. She probably went to the business center to see a lawyer, Mickey thoughtfully suggested. So what happened? Maybe there's something I can do to help. There was so much sympathy in her ex's voice, she went soft. All right, I'll tell you everything. I've been doing some research, John began at the door. Well, his companions hurried him on his way. For 3 days, John watched the house, where he spent his childhood. In the first 2 days, he preferred not to rush to conclusions, so he was silent as a fish. I'm reporting, he said solidly. My son lives in a mansion with some pretty gypsy girl, but Julia I saw only on the first day. She went to the lawyer's office early this morning. The question is why? Maybe to get advice on how to handle the house, Cindy said sadly. So Julia's in on it after all. That's what I thought at first, John nodded. But she didn't spend the night at the mansion that day. She didn't the next day either. And she'd probably stay at her boat's place tonight too, in a fancy white car. And today they went to the agency, and they go there for other things. For example, you're wanted. Probably unofficially. Thank God, exclaimed the mother, tears welling up in her eyes. So maybe I should let Julia know I'm all right. It hurts my heart for the girl. Well, I think she's in good hands, John smiled, but we'll make sure of it. We just have to think it over. We need to teach Max a good lesson. Do you think Veronica knows? She was talking about some shady business, but I don't think Veronica's involved. Veronica got married not long ago, Max moved out, and they don't talk much. Veronica, John said thoughtfully, the name of his ex-wife. To lose a woman like that, you'd have to be an idiot. I thought you said you wanted revenge. A homeless man called Lund raised his voice. Do you have any ideas? He asked. One idea, but what an idea. Mickey shook his head after hearing Julia's story. You can't be left alone for a moment. You'll make a mess of things. Are you kidding me? She asked sadly. Yes, you're doing the right thing. What's the use? Mickey grinned. You've got to take action. How? The girl sighed. The lawyer said it all. Well, in fact, he said everything right. The evidence is nil, a shish tenth. So, the statement to the police, I apologize, only to wipe. Well, there you go. You can look for other leads. I have a good friend in the department. He won't be in until the day after tomorrow. I'm sure he can help us. Us? Julia asked quietly and looked at Mickey carefully. Us, he answered firmly. That evening, Julia moved in with Mickey. They decided to give the relationship another chance. The lovers talked until almost morning. This time they talked about the fact that there would be no ambiguities between them, and if one of them doubted the other, the issue would be put on the agenda and discussed in detail. And the young people also talked about what their home would be like and what they would name their children. I love you so much, Julia whispered, and they fell asleep with their arms around each other. The next morning, Mickey proposed to Julia. I'm sorry I don't have a ring, he said, but I promise to make it up to you tonight. What the hell is a ring? She exclaimed. The main thing is that we are together and love each other. There is a proposal, Mickey smiled. And what is it? Spend the day together. Let's go to the ski center. It's the end of the season, and I haven't done much skiing. But if you want to go someplace else, I'm open to it. No? Julia shook her head with a smile. I'd love to go to the ski center too. But first, we're going to the jewelry store. Good. Did I really have to go through all this to have a white streak in our relationship? She thought, trying on a marvelously beautiful ring with a ruby framed by diamonds. It doesn't matter. The main thing is to find my grandmother and make sure that this nasty bunch finally gets what they deserve. Alex, Mickey's buddy from the department, said that the accident had not been reported, and if it didn't happen. Couldn't it have been covered up? Mickey suggested. Theoretically, yes, but everything can be dug up if you want, answered the law enforcement officer and turned to Julia. Do you remember the license plate number? I'd like to forget it, but I can't, sighed the girl. Write it down. Very well, nodded Alex, writing down the number, and Julia asked, And how long will all this take? 3 months, he estimated, the investigation plus the appropriate inquiries. Well, and the search for your grandmother can't be started today. Great, Julia was happy. When the police brought her to the place where they had left Cindy, she wanted to weep with despair. The mountains of garbage, the dilapidated hovel against the snowy desert looked depressing. Poor grandmother, thought Julia. Where is she now? The place is deserted, commented one of the staff. And it's a long way from town. Maybe some random motorist picked her up and took her to some hospital, another suggested. Maybe. Anyway, we're on it. Checking all the hospitals, said the investigator, and glancing at Julia added, and morgues. The girl shuddered, but said nothing. She was sure that her grandmother was alive. The wrong one. Well, let's go, said the investigator with a sigh. We'll work. I'm not going, Julia shook her head. Why not? I just want to be alone. The policemen just shrugged their shoulders and drove off into the city. The girl breathed in the February air with pleasure. It was much fresher outside the city, despite it being a dump. Can't get enough of it, thought Julia, and walked along the dump. She didn't notice that she had gone 2 kilometers and suddenly saw a house. It was small, unassuming, but it was a house, and from the chimney of the house there was smoke, clearly hinting at the presence of a man. The girl's heart began to thump, and she did not hesitate to go in the direction of the house. Near the house there was a bearded man in an absorbent cotton jacket. What do you want? He asked in a rough voice, but without aggression. You see, 3 days ago some bad people brought an old woman here, so I thought. Cindy was preparing a simple lunch of cheap pasta and stew, but when she heard her granddaughter's voice, she hastily wiped her hands on a towel made from a piece of old curtain and ran outside. Right in front of her stood her granddaughter, her Julia. Grandma, the girl exclaimed and rushed over to Cindy. Grandma, my sweetheart, I had nothing to do with it. I really had nothing to do with it. I'll tell you everything. Shh, I know you had nothing to do with it, the old lady said in a soothing voice. I thought I'd never see you again, Julia sobbed. Well, no, said the old woman in a cheerful voice. No, you won't. Come on, honey. There's someone I need you to meet. Julia entered the house and found it cozy. The only room was divided by cloth screens. Amazingly, there was wallpaper on the walls. Different ones, though. Kiryusha, son, Cindy called, and from one of the beds stood a man with eyes. Max. John? Stunned Julia said. Yes, Julia, confirmed Grandma. It's your great uncle. When she saw her relative, she had mixed feelings. She remembered Uncle John's artwork well, though she was still a girl. There was nothing to respect Max's father for. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, thought Julia. But when she looked into those kind and sad eyes of a man who had suffered a lot of grief, she was ashamed of her thoughts. It is human nature to repent. Grandma, and I'm getting married, said her granddaughter with a smile and showed her ring. Really? Exclaimed Cindy. What is this joyous occasion going to happen? Mickey and I have decided to apply as soon as we've sorted out the thing. Alex, Pashka's friend from the department, said it would take about 3 months. About 3 months, Grandma repeated. Well, that's good. Good what? Julia didn't understand. Well, at least you'll be properly prepared for the way. I'll stay here for a while. I like to be close to the people, so to speak. My son is close by. Grandmother, she gasped. But you are used to very different conditions. I thought Mickey and I were going to take you away from here. What's to stop Uncle John from coming with us? Well, sometimes it's nice to have a change of scenery, Cindy chuckled. And of course Uncle John will come with us, but not right now. We've decided to get back at those bastards in a big way. 3 months from now. It'll be a spectacular moment. For now, let the grandson enjoy a nice life with his sweetheart. You know about this too? Yeah, Uncle John is a detective. How are you going to get revenge? The granddaughter asked. When Julia was told about the plan of revenge, the girl laughed. You only write scripts, she said, turning to Loom. I'll think about it, the homeless man said modestly. A couple of weeks later, Julie got a call from Alex. I have good news for you, he said. The victim of the traffic accident has been found. And what about him? The girl asked, frightened. Is he alive? He's alive. He's already testified against Woldemar. I don't understand. Julia's head was spinning. The victim is alive and has testified against Woldemar? You mean against him? There's not much to explain, Alex grinned. The accident was staged. Allegedly the victim, a certain Steve, a former actor and stuntman, for a sum of money agreed to help your Voldemar, and he banally screwed him. And then Lyubimov saw a note with a request for help in finding eyewitnesses to the accident, which we placed in newspapers and the internet. So he decided to help in the investigation, in retaliation. When Voldemar found out he'd been ratted out, he went into hiding. It took a little over 2 months to find him. Alex's prediction was correct. 3 months later, Julia visited Max and Jessica from time to time in order to gain their trust, and she succeeded. The girl knew all their plans. I want to propose to Jessica, the cousin shared with her in the middle of May. Great, Julia exclaimed. But I want to do it somehow original. Maybe you can give me some ideas. And you make her a romantic dinner outdoors, she advised. It's warm now, and the smells outside are amazing. The apple trees alone. Oh yeah, they'll have a romantic dinner. Julia thought vindictively. They'll remember it for the rest of their lives. Max and Jessica dined in the courtyard of the mansion, and the aromas of meat roasting on the grill filled the neighborhood. The first stars in the sky were casting a romantic glow, and Max decided, it's time. Jessica, will you marry me? He asked in a heartfelt voice. The girl did not have time to answer. A terrible howling sound came from the gate. What is it? Jessica asked fearfully. Could it be a dog? A man in rags came up to them and said in an afterlife voice, My son, are you sure? Who are you? Max asked, startled to recognize the man as his father, overgrown, aged, and like 2 drops of water like him. I'm your dad, John muttered. But I've come for you. God sees everything. Why are you doing this to Grandma? Max suddenly felt something warm running down his legs. I had no other choice, the boy whispered. I was forced. So John said in the same afterlife voice, but with metallic tones, I don't want you here tomorrow. Yes, the son nodded. We'll be gone. When John returned to his dwelling, no one was asleep. How did it go? Cindy asked impatiently. It went great, replied the son in a satisfied voice. After listening to the tape recorder, the Buns were laughing their asses off. That's it, smiled the old lady sadly. We will miss you very much, said Lon with sincere regret, and we will come to visit you. Cindy replied cheerfully, right son? Really, nodded John with a smile. The next day, as Max and Jessica were leaving the mansion, they were arrested. It had been 2 months. Naomi Cindy Smith and her son Ernest were flying to the USA, and the woman was very worried. In 2 days, her eldest daughter was getting married. However, Naomi's excitement was not only about Julia's upcoming marriage. How would her mother receive her? Needless to say, Naomi had never been a good daughter, nor was she a good mother. But after her divorce from Robert, she looked at things differently. The woman was determined to mend her relationship with her mother, her daughter, and her suddenly reappeared brother. After all, blood is not water. Mama, Julia exclaimed joyfully and cried, but they were tears of happiness. Mama, Ernest, meet your future son-in-law. Mickey, he said with a smile, kissing Naomi's hand, and then shook hands with the boy. Where's? Grandma's in the car, Julia explained. My blood pressure and my legs are killing me. Come on, let's go. Naomi, Cindy said sternly. I'm gonna kick your ass." Everyone laughed with relief. Only 7-year-old Eric didn't understand why this strict woman, who was his grandmother, wanted to kick his mother's ass. "What's a kicking anyway?" pondered the little guy. Mickey kept his word. 6 months after the wedding, the Rasputin couple moved into a new house. By that time, Julia was 4 months pregnant. The couple already knew that they would have a girl, and Julia suggested naming her Cindy, in honor of her great-grandmother. It would be a sin not to name her after such an amazing woman, her husband agreed with a smile.